Three, two, one, zero.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ground Control on Queen City News Plus, where we talk about all things outer space here, something we've been talking about so much here, and one of the reasons why we even started the show was the launch and flight of Artemis 2. And with that in mind, I have a very special guest with me. I have Rick Henfling, who is one of the flight directors here, was actually the re-entry flight director of Artemis 2, so helping to bring the crew and the spacecraft back here to Earth. First, Rick, how are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me today, Andrew.
First off, I got to say the jacket looks sick. Okay, love it, loving the jacket here. So
they are custom made, and there's been groups across NASA who have been trying to come up with their own style of jacket. It's really kind of developed a good esprit de corps among the NASA team.
No, yeah, it looks really, really cool. So, we do want to talk about your experience with Artemis 2, just that kind of magical period. But first, just getting to kind of your background here, Rick, how does someone, through their career eventually become a flight director for NASA? I'm just curious kind of what your background is, how you got to sort of where you are in your career.
Great question. So I started about 20 years ago as a flight controller on the space shuttle. And so when I graduated from college in Ohio, moved to Houston, worked on the space shuttle for the last 5 years of its missions as it finished assembly of the International Space Station. And then when the space shuttle retired, we shifted our focus to exploration and commercial crew. And so I helped out with some of the early development of Orion and the Space Launch System, and also the SpaceX Dragon and Boeing Starliner capsules. And then in 2015, I was selected as a flight director and started training for International Space Station missions. I have supported spacewalks. I've supported visiting vehicle arrivals and departures. I've worked on the Boeing Starliner as the flight director, and then most recently as the Artemis 2 entry flight director.
Yeah, and that was just so amazing with Artemis 2. But when you thought when the shuttle program ended, did you think how long, when that happened, back in 2011, I'm pretty sure it was the last flight of the space shuttle. How long did you think it was going to be until maybe we started, doing launches again here from the United States and then eventually trying to make our way back to the moon?
Yeah, well, we were hopeful that it would be as short as possible, but we have to balance the timeline for getting U.S. launch capability against the safety of the astronauts. We want to make sure that we're not cutting any of the corners or taking unnecessary risks that could ultimately put their lives in danger, because we've learned in spaceflight that when things go wrong, they can go wrong really quickly. And they're often a result of some decisions that were made in the development phase. And we wanted to be very deliberate on those decisions to ensure that we had a spacecraft and a launch vehicle that were designed safely for the astronauts.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you found out you were selected to be a flight director for Artemis 2, which is the first time humans have left low Earth orbit since the days of Apollo over 50 years ago, what kind of was it? What was your kind of overall feeling? Was it excitement? Was it stress? It's a lot of responsibility here and such a big moment for NASA. Kind of what was running through your head when you found out you were going to really be such an integral part of this mission?
So first and foremost, it was excitement because, like you said, it was the first time we were going back to the moon in over 50 years. And to be a part of that, it was really a privilege to be selected as one of the flight directors to help lead that mission. And then once the excitement kind of waned off and we got down to business, you started to realize that there's a lot of responsibility. We had to develop procedures from scratch. There was nothing that existed on how to fly the Orion home from the moon with astronauts on board. And so I had a team of really committed experts who were, we would sit down in conference rooms together for hours at a time to hash out each line in the procedures. And we would take inputs from Reed and Victor and Christina and Jeremy. And ultimately, we came up with a set of procedures that were able to be executed by those astronauts as they returned home from the moon. And The proof was in the pudding. We got them home safely at the end of the day. And so we're tremendously proud of our efforts in the lead up to that mission.
Yeah, absolutely, a huge success. And there are a few. I think there's at least three total. There were three total flight directors for this mission, correct? Or was there more than that?
We had three who served as the lead. So I was the lead for the entry phase. Jeff Radigan was the overall mission lead, and Judd Freeling was the ascent flight director. But in the course of that 10-day mission, we were staffed around the clock. And so we had about 8 flight directors in total who were assigned various shifts throughout the mission. So it was a real team effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, 8. That's incredible. And when it comes to your particular role here on reentry, sort of what sort of stages do you really start to take over control? Like, is it getting right as they get back to the Earth orbit here, or maybe they're already starting to come back on the free return trajectory from the moon? Kind of when do you start to step in and sort of prepare here for game time when you're going to be that lead director on reentry?
So the entry team was assigned to work 2 particular shifts. I had assignments earlier in the mission, so I worked the first couple of days as well. But the entry flight specific team came on the day before entry, and we were responsible for answering questions from the flight crew as they were preparing for entry. We gave them time for the 4 of them to review procedures, review some of their suits that they were going to be interacting with. And then ask the ground teams about anything that came up as a result of those reviews. We also talked about the weather and the splashdown forecast with them. We talked to them about the state of the recovery team, which was a joint NASA and Navy effort to extract the flight crew from the spaceship. And we had a good conversation with them. And then the entry team goes off console and the flight crew goes to sleep. And then we return to console on splashdown day about the time that the crew woke up. And so we took about an hour to hand over from the previous shift of flight controllers. And then we had the responsibility for performing the final trajectory correction maneuver, which was done to fine tune our flight path angle for ensuring we hit the atmosphere correctly. And then we did the crew module and service module separation, and we reoriented the capsule to enter Earth's atmosphere, going Mach 35. And then we saw the spaceship slow down from Mach 35 to a nice easy 20 miles per hour while under the main parachutes for a gentle splash in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, no, yeah, and bringing them back to Earth, just an incredible, successful mission there. Kind of take me through, through that phase of reentry. Sort of what are really, as you guys here on the ground in Houston, obviously for the crew as well, what are some of the most crucial moments? You talked about a maneuver there, and then obviously, they hit the atmosphere going Mach 35, and you bring them all the way down to 20 miles an hour. What are sort of the most, crucial phases of reentry for that crew, and sort of the different boxes you're taking as they're getting closer here back to the surface?
Sure. There's a couple of key milestones that we were keeping our eye on. First is that trajectory correction maneuver. Once we executed that correctly, we knew that we were on a good path to enter atmosphere where we expected and land in the expected location. Another milestone was making sure that we got GPS data. So just like we rely on GPS on our cell phones here on Earth, we relied on the GPS signals to ensure that Orion had a good navigation state. And so once we had good GPS data was a key milestone in ensuring we were going to get them home safely. All of the separation events between the crew module and the service module, that all went really well. That's another key milestone. Getting oriented heat shield forward, that's critical to ensure that the heat shield can absorb the heat of entry as we reduce our energy from a really high speed to a really low speed. And then blackout, of course, is a tense moment. We didn't have communication with the astronauts during that 6-minute period, but we had
6 minutes.
Yeah, 6 minutes. And so while we didn't have communication, we had visuals from aircraft that were flying overhead. And the aircraft had an eye, they had special cameras that could see the heat signature of the spacecraft. And so we knew that the spacecraft was still flying true and it was still on a course to land where we expected it to land. And when blackout ended and we recovered comms, everyone kind of had a sigh of relief. But all along, we knew the spaceship was fine because we could see it from those airborne assets. Um,
Gotcha. Yeah, so I was gonna say, what was the moment where maybe your heart rate was, kind of the highest here during reentry? And I was gonna assume probably during blackout, but was it a little bit more relaxing? You still had visual confirmation that everything was still basically for the most part going according to plan.
it was comforting to know that we had visual on the spacecraft through blackout, but not being able to communicate with the flight crew is that's the team on the ground wants to be able to help the flight crew work through problems. And if we don't have communication with the spaceship, or if we don't have data on how the spaceship is performing, we can't do our main job, which is to help out the astronauts. So that's where blackout is most tense. But when the spaceship came out of blackout was right when we predicted it, and we had that good comm check with Reed, and that was a great moment, a great milestone for the Artemis 2 mission.
Yeah, it really was a great milestone. And as we start to look ahead here to sort of upcoming Artemis missions, how does it work here? When will the different flight directors get potentially assigned to the Artemis 3 mission? I mean, we just had the Artemis 3 crew announced, which is Frank Rubio, Andre Douglas, Randy Bresnik, and then Luca Parmigiano from the European Space Agency. So that crew was just announced. The goal here is to launch in 2027. When will kind of maybe the flight directors eventually kind of get their basically assignments for that mission?
So we've got some notional ideas of who's going to be working what shift. We haven't formally made any announcements yet, but I'm planning on working the launch and the landing in some capacity. Judd Freeling, who worked the launch for Artemis 2, will be doing a similar role. We like to keep some continuity amongst the flight directors between the missions, because there's expertise from having flown the previous mission that we can apply going forward. But we also need to increase the pool of flight directors who have experience flying missions like these. And so we're going to bring in some new people, and we're hoping to really expand our team, our bench depth with Artemis 3.
Absolutely. And one of my last questions I have for you is, when you think about going from this incredibly successful Artemis 2 to Artemis 3 and eventually Artemis 4, do you think about anything that you guys as a team, as a crew, want to try? Because obviously it was a success. Is there anything you guys think about? Hey, we want to do this better. This is what we want to kind of improve on for the next mission to try to make it even better and better going forward.
Yeah, we've been conducting debriefs with the Artemis 2 astronauts. We've been soliciting lessons learned from our flight controllers, and we've got some good lists of things to make better for Artemis 3 and beyond. And that's one of the most important goals of these exploration missions, is to be able to take what you learned on the previous mission and apply it to a future mission. And we've already started engaging with the Orion program and the SLS program to make some improvements to their vehicles, so that we can make sure that Randy and Luca and Andre and Frank return home safely to their families after docking with those the landers in low Earth orbit.
Gotcha. And and one of my final question here is, when you think about, because some of these upcoming missions here, you're going to be using sort of private space company, different infrastructure. Mainly this was SLS here with the launch, and then with Orion. How much understanding do you guys have of, kind of the different, you've got Blue Moon with Blue Origin, the lander here with SpaceX as well. How much of an understanding do you guys as flight directors in NASA kind of have to get an understanding for how this equipment works in order to sort of operate it effectively?
It's tremendously important to have that understanding, and we have flight directors who work closely with Blue Origin as well as with SpaceX. And so you'll see a flight director who's got that expertise in rendezvous with Blue Origin working on console for that part of the mission. And you might see a different flight director on console who has expertise with Starship and how Orion will rendezvous with Starship. And we've already been exercising those relationships. We spend a lot of time flying to Washington State to meet with Blue Origin, flying out to Starbase in southern Texas or Hawthorne in California to meet with SpaceX. And we're leveraging all those experiences over the past couple of years, and it's going to help make Artemis 3 a success.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's good. And that's going to do it for us here with our interview, Rick. I just want to thank you so much for your time and just a really fascinating conversation that we were able to have with you today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. It's been a good time.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.